II, as the Allied troops battled Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union forcibly occupied much of Eastern Europe. The Baltic states were seized by Stalin's Red Army. Among these states was the nation of Lithuania. The Soviets began taking control of the country and began targeting people, declaring them to be enemies of communism. Politicians, intellectuals, and community leaders were purged and executed in an atmosphere of lawlessness, paranoia, and extreme violence. Lithuania got the worst, as the Partizani, or the guerrilla resistance fighters, were the strongest and most defiant in this country. The USSR began deporting citizens in secrecy, beginning on the night of June 14, 1941. Armed groups of soldiers would surround a targeted neighborhood in the middle of the night, as it was easier to find them at home and it was less likely to alert the surrounding area. Everyone inside would be ordered to pack food and other necessities within 5 minutes. If someone resisted or attempted to run away, they'd be shot or brutally beaten. Families would then be taken away to their local train station, in which they'd be separated by either age or gender. Most families were never reunited ever again. These trains often used cattle cars with no amenities. The journey often lasted 6 weeks to several months. The conditions were unsanitary and stifling hot, as passengers often lacked food, water, basic necessities, and fresh air due to cramped conditions. Trains often reported deaths, especially among children and the elderly before reaching the destination. From 1941 to 1953, some 282,000 Lithuanian citizens were deported to remote areas and work camps of the USSR in Siberia, Central Asia, and as far as the Arctic Circle. Historical sources state that the USSR planned to deport 700,000 people from Lithuania, but the plan was interrupted by the war and emigration to the west. There were some 10 million inhabitants in all 3 Baltic states on the eve of the Soviet occupation. Altogether, approximately 600,000 prisoners were deported from Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Proportionally, the number of Baltic prisoners would have been equal to the loss of 20 million people in the United States. That's like the whole population of New York, island and all, gone within 5 years. 30% were men, 30% of deportees were women, and 40% were children under 16. The deportations of the civilians served a double purpose in the eyes of the Soviet Union: to Russify the Lithuanian language and culture, and providing free labor in sparsely inhabited areas of the Soviet Union. Many Lithuanians farmed Siberian tundra for beets, fished in the Arctic, or logged timber for the country. Due to rampant disease, starvation, and inhumane conditions, many died during the first 2 years. Based on the incomplete and inaccurate records kept by the NVD and KGB, it is estimated that around 50,000 deportees died in Russia. Some 60,000 managed to return to Lithuania, while 30,000 were prohibited from settling back to their homeland. During the Soviet, Nazi, and Soviet occupations, Lithuania lost 33% of its total population. That amounts to nearly 1 million people within the span of a few years. Russia has still not asked for forgiveness for the Soviet terror in the occupied Baltic states. They haven't even acknowledged the atrocities during these years, as families were torn apart and countless lives were lost. Those who did survive remained under communist rule for nearly half a century until they regained their hard-fought independence in 1991. Even the West has chosen to forget these horrors. Nothing of these horrors is taught in our schools. There is no grand museum, no monument, nothing in Washington, D.C. You may be asking yourself, this happened so long ago, what can I do to help? Excellent question! Simply put, be informed. There's a few ways we recommend to go about this. This is no way an endorsement, but we would invite you to read Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sapatis. It's an incredibly powerful book about the deportations through the eyes of a young Lithuanian girl. While the movie is never better than the book, the movie, Ashes in the Snow, which is based off the book, remains a faithful adaptation to its source material. We would highly recommend this to anyone, as it's a moving Lithuanian cinematic landmark. We also recommend to observe with us on our Day of Hope and Mourning on June 14th. This is the day where we as a nation remember the victims of the deportations. While we undoubtedly do have a rather dark history, we have a bright optimism for our future.